The pre-summit events ahead of the U.S.-Africa leadership meetings are showcasing dynamism and in-depth of multi-dimensional cultural and economic ties between the U.S. and Africa. One of Nigeria's leading businessmen and philanthropists, Elumelu, in partnership with the U.S. Department of State, organized an event to foster relationships and deal-making and highlight opportunities across the U.S.-Africa investment ecosystem. Nkechi Nnanna has more on this.
Investing in U.S.-Africa cultural and economic ties is the agenda at the Innovators Gathering, an evening hosted by the U.S. Secretary of State in partnership with the U.S. Agency for International Development and the Elumelu Foundation. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken underscored the support in catalyzing partnerships between African and diaspora innovators, entrepreneurs, and U.S. capital technology.
Earlier this year in South Africa, I had an opportunity to set out our administration's strategy for the region. And at its core, the strategy can be distilled in one word. You've already heard it spoken tonight: partnership. It's rooted in the recognition that the United States and African nations can't deliver on any of our fundamental needs and aspirations for our people, and we can't solve any of the really big challenges we face if we don't work together. So, it's about what we can do with African nations and people, not for them. Let me just very quickly go through 3 ways our administration is working to broaden and deepen those partnerships to foster African innovation. First, we're investing in the infrastructure that provides the foundation for African entrepreneurship. Second, we're investing in rising leaders. Since President Obama created the Young African Leaders Initiative, nearly 5,800 trailblazers from every country in sub-Saharan Africa have come to the United States for academic and leadership training. Third, we are fostering greater engagement by American companies. You're going to hear more about that throughout this week.
At the summit, Africa is tagged as one of the fastest growing startup cultures in the world, and one of the biggest drivers of that growth is calling for mutual benefit and self-reliance in its relations with the U.S.
My message to U.S. was to reimagine your relationship with Africa away from aid and to focus on empowerment of youth and support for sustainable private sector institutions. My subsequent op-ed in the Hill called for a new U.S. engagement with Africa. The fact that we are gathered here in Washington this week shows to a large extent a genuine interest to re-engage in a manner that prioritizes mutual benefit and self-reliance. We see this as a genuine and substantive desire to re-engage with Africa and to re-engage on a basis that benefits us all. The key words are mutual respect, mutual opportunity, and mutual objectives. We appreciate particularly the focus on the private sector.
To amplify the African story and change the narrative, the New York mayor highlights how far the continent has come.
And so I need for my brothers and sisters from the diaspora to understand the moment that you're in right now. You are in a moment right now when, the first time in history, you are seeing power that is not American power, but is African power. But if you don't connect the dots, you are not going to understand the full purpose of this moment. The mayor of the most important city in the most important country is an African. The most important cities in America are headed by Africans. In New York City, the top law enforcement executive, Letitia James, is an African. The head of the Assembly is an African. The head of the Senate is an African. The head of the City Council is an African. The public advocate is an African. The district attorney in the Bronx is an African. The district attorney in Manhattan is an African. All of this chocolate, what are we going to do with it?
that the world is recognizing the next generation of African leaders through their innovation and success stories. And as the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit is underway, one thing is clear: Africa must strive for mutual benefits in their relations. Nkechi, Nnanna, Arise News, Washington, D.C.
Join us live from Washington, D.C., where the three-day U.S.-Africa Summit is taking place. It's Arise correspondent Nkechi and Nnanna. Nkechi, good morning. How are you? To kick off the U.S.-Africa Summit event, there were innovators gathering on the sideline. Tell us more about that. What happened yesterday, Nkechi? Good to see you.
Yes. Good to see you, Rufai. In a nutshell, it was an event focusing on innovative young Africans. Now, also, it was showcasing the U.S. and its partners, like I mentioned in the reports, that are bringing together just U.S. and African investors, entrepreneurs, members of the diaspora, basically to sort of strengthen the cultural and economic ties between the African continent and the U.S. Now, evident of that milestone at that event for the work that they've been doing together was the 2022 Africa Innovation Pitch Competition. Now, this competition was sponsored by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, where out of 2,000 applicants, 10 finalists, we had the top 3 from Ghana, from Kenya, and from Nigeria, sort of pitching to us at that event. And the winner of that competition was a company, a startup in Nigeria called Health Botics Limited. It's a Nigerian startup that digitalizes the health sector in Africa just to improve the system. And also amongst those partners of the event, obviously, is the Tony Elumelu Foundation, which in 2015 pledged $100 million to empower 10,000 Africans and in turn create 1 million jobs in 10 years. And the man himself, Mr. Elumelu, says after 7 cycles, they've now empowered 18,000 Africans. And he attributed this to this sort of partnerships that are taking place right now at the summit. Fine.
Excellent. So today kickstarts officially the 3-day summit. What are we expecting on day 1?
Day 1 is packed, but I'll highlight 3 of the forums that we are expecting at the beginning of the summit. To kick off the summit this morning, we have the African and Diaspora Young Leaders Forum, and it's themed Amplifying Voices and Building Lasting Partnerships. Now, as outlined in President Biden's or his administration's U.S.-Africa strategy, it was mentioned that the African diaspora is a source of strength. And out of that pool, you have the Nigerian diaspora, which is the most successful diaspora in the U.S. When it comes to income levels and education. And also, apart from that, there'll be a robust talk and debate focusing on trade, and more so focusing on the key topic, the fate of the African Growth and Opportunity Act, the AGOA Act. And so there'll be an AGOA Ministerial Forum, which will be really looking at the top questions, really focusing on that pact. 1, is that act really compatible with all sub-Saharan nations? 2, should that pact continue? Should that program continue? And if it should continue, in what form should it continue? And something else that's important today, Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari, will be speaking on climate adaptation and the just energy transition. So these are the top 3 highlights for day 1 of the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit.
Okay, over the years, we've seen other summits with similar messages from China, Japan, France. Does this mark a new scramble for Africa, as some people have argued? And how does this particular summit in Washington, D.C. contrast, if it does, with efforts by other countries?
You're quite right. Everyone sort of is scrambling for Africa, and that's the big question that everyone is asking. Why now? Why Africa? What's the attraction? And we know that Africa has that growing population of 1.3 billion people, young and new markets emerging, and so everyone sort of wants a piece of that cake. But the difference that this summit brings with the body language and some of the statements that we've been reading is those key words: mutual benefit, a change moving towards equal opportunity, a change moving from that donor, the US or the wealthy nations being the donors and the African countries being the recipients. And so I think last week there was an interview that I watched on the morning show actually with the US Consular General in Lagos, Will Stevens, where he was saying there's a shift in conversations from the African solution to African problems to the African solutions to global problems. And so now everyone sees that Africa, it's time past for Africa to be in the conversation, for African voices to be in the conversations of international global economy, good governance, peace, democracy, and the likes. And more so that the US is using this summit to really underscore its determination to change the narrative of that relationship. It's even more important for the African government, for the private sector that's here in Washington, D.C., to act accordingly and to know that it's time for us to now be the leadership and also be picky with these external powers that are interested in the African continent.
All right, thank you so much for your time.